The muzzle flash lit up the darkness for just a millisecond, but it was enough. 300 meters away, a Taliban fighter dropped his RPG launcher and crumpled to the ground. The Navy SEALs pinned behind the crumbling concrete wall had no idea who their guardian angel was. They couldn't see her. They didn't know her name. But Sarah Martinez was about to turn the deadliest night of their deployment into a legend that would echo through the corridors of SOCOM for decades to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan stretched endlessly under a moonless sky, their jagged peaks cutting harsh silhouettes against the stars. It was October 15, 2017, and the temperature had already dropped below freezing. In a remote valley 40 kilometers northeast of Kabul, a six-man Navy SEAL team moved through the darkness with the precision of ghosts. Team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, checked his watch. 247 hours. They were running behind schedule, but that was the nature of these operations. Intelligence had suggested a high-value target would be at the compound by midnight, but their sources had been wrong before. The target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition supply routes, had apparently decided to arrive fashionably late to his own meeting. The compound sat like a concrete fortress in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by rocky terrain that offered both cover and concealment to anyone defending it. Morrison studied the structure through his night vision goggles. 2 stories, flat roof, multiple entry points. It looked straightforward enough, but Afghanistan had taught him that nothing was ever as simple as it appeared. Viper 1, this is Viper 6, Morrison whispered into his radio. Target building in sight. Moving to establish overwatch. The response crackled back immediately. Copy, Viper 6. The weather window closes in 30 minutes. Make it count, Morrison grimaced. The incoming storm system would ground their helicopter extraction, potentially leaving them stranded in hostile territory for hours. They needed to move fast. 50 meters behind the main assault team, Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez adjusted his position on the rocky outcrop that served as their designated sniper perch. As the team's designated marksman, his job was to provide cover and eliminate any threats that emerged during the assault. Through his scope, he had a clear view of the compound's approaches and most of its windows. Overwatch in position, Rodriguez reported. I count 4 sentries. 2 on the roof, 1 at the main entrance, 1 patrolling the perimeter. Morrison acknowledged the report and began coordinating the assault. The plan was textbook SEAL operation. Rodriguez would neutralize the sentry simultaneously with suppressed rounds, while the assault team breached from 2 directions. Quick, quiet, and clean. But as Rodriguez settled into his firing position, adjusting his breathing and calculating wind drift, none of them noticed the figure moving silently through the rocks 800 meters to their north. Sarah Martinez had been tracking the same Taliban cell for 3 weeks. As a CIA operative embedded with a Joint Special Operations Task Force, she possessed intelligence that the SEAL team lacked. The compound wasn't just a meeting place, it was a trap. Taliban fighters had been filtering into positions around the valley for the past 6 hours, turning the seemingly isolated target into the center of a carefully orchestrated ambush. Sarah had tried to contact the SEAL team through official channels, but communication protocols and jurisdictional red tape had delayed her warnings. By the time she realized the assault was proceeding as planned, it was too late to stop it through normal means. She had 2 choices: watch 6 American operators walk into a death trap, or take matters into her own hands. She chose the latter. Sarah had earned her reputation in the shadow world of covert operations through 15 years of service that officially didn't exist. A former Army Ranger, Special Forces qualified, and trained at the CIA's most classified facilities, she was one of only 12 women cleared for the agency's most sensitive direct action missions. Her specialty was precision shooting, and she had more confirmed kills than most infantry battalions. Tonight, she carried a modified M24 sniper rifle equipped with night vision optics and loaded with match-grade ammunition. Her ghillie suit was perfectly suited to the rocky Afghan terrain, making her virtually invisible even in daylight. But more importantly, she had positioned herself at the one vantage point that offered clear lines of sight to the Taliban positions that the SEALs couldn't see. As Morrison's team began their final approach to the compound, Sarah counted at least 18 enemy fighters concealed in fighting positions throughout the valley. Machine gun nests, mortar crews, RPG teams. The Taliban had turned the entire area into a killing field, and the SEALs were walking directly into it. "Viper 6, this is Viper 2, came Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "Something's not right. I'm seeing heat signatures that weren't there 5 minutes ago." Morrison paused, studying the compound through his own optics. "Explain." "Multiple contacts. They're not in the building, they're surrounding it. This whole thing stinks like a week-old fish." The realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. They weren't conducting an assault, they were walking into an ambush. But it was too late to abort cleanly. Taliban fighters were already moving to cut off their escape routes, and the helicopter extraction was still 20 minutes out. "All stations, this is Viper 6, Morrison transmitted. "We have multiple hostiles. Abort assault and move to Rally Point Bravo." But as the words left his mouth, the night exploded into chaos. The first RPG streaked across the darkness like a comet, impacting just meters from the SEAL team's position. The explosion sent shrapnel and rock fragments flying in all directions, and Morrison felt something hot tear through his shoulder. Around him, his men dove for cover behind whatever protection they could find. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 different positions, the muzzle flashes creating a deadly light show against the mountain backdrop. Tracer rounds zipped through the air like angry hornets, forcing the SEALs to press themselves against the rocky ground. "Contact! Contact!" Rodriguez shouted into his radio. "We're taking effective fire from multiple positions." Sarah watched the ambush unfold through her scope, calculating distances and identifying targets with the cold precision that had kept her alive through dozens of similar situations. The Taliban had executed their trap perfectly, but they had made one critical error. They hadn't accounted for her presence. The first shot was the hardest, not technically, but psychologically. Once she pulled that trigger, there would be no going back. She would be declaring war on behalf of 6 men who didn't even know she existed. But as she watched a Taliban fighter adjust his aim toward the pinned SEALs, the choice became simple. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and the night changed forever. The Barrett M24's report echoed across the valley like thunder. But by the time the sound reached the Taliban positions, their machine gunner was already dead. Sarah's first round punched through his chest at 2,847 feet per second, dropping him instantly. The sustained fire that had been shredding the rocks around Morrison's team suddenly went silent. What the hell? Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thompson pressed himself deeper into his makeshift cover, confused by the sudden cessation of incoming rounds. Did Rodriguez get him? Rodriguez's voice crackled back immediately. "Negative. That wasn't me. Someone else is out there." Sarah was already acquiring her second target. The Taliban mortar crew had set up their position behind a cluster of boulders 300 meters east of the compound, thinking they were safely concealed from the SEAL team's line of sight. They were right, but they hadn't considered all possible angles of attack. Her crosshairs settled on the mortar operator just as he dropped a round into the tube. Sarah's second shot arrived before the mortar round reached its apex, catching the Taliban fighter in the head and sending him sprawling backward. The mortar round detonated harmlessly in the distance, its trajectory thrown off by the dead operator's final reflexive movement. "Viper 6, we've got a guardian angel out there," Rodriguez transmitted. his voice tight with concentration as he tried to identify friendly positions. Professional work. Someone systematically eliminating their support weapons. Morrison duck-walked toward a better position, his wounded shoulder screaming with each movement. Blood soaked through his tactical vest, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. Not yet. Can you identify the shooter's position? Negative. Muzzle flash suppression is too good. Whoever it is knows their business. Sarah had already moved. After each shot, she displaced to a new firing position, never staying in one place long enough for return fire to find her. It was a technique drilled into her through years of training and combat experience. Shoot, move, communicate, shoot again. The Taliban fighters were beginning to realize they were being hunted, but they couldn't pinpoint her location. Her third target was the most critical. An RPG team had managed to get within effective range of the SEAL team's position, and the operator was lining up a shot that would likely kill at least 2 of Morrison's men. Sarah's bullet caught him just as his finger tightened on the trigger, causing him to jerk the weapon skyward. The RPG round screamed harmlessly into the night sky before exploding against the mountain. "Face, Jesus Christ," whispered Petty Officer Second Class David Chun, the team's communications specialist. "Whoever's up there just saved our asses. That RPG would have turned us into pink mist." But Sarah's intervention was drawing attention. Taliban fighters were starting to adjust their positions, trying to locate the source of the precise fire that was dismantling their ambush. She could hear their voices echoing across the valley in rapid-fire Pashto, coordinating a response to the new threat. Time was running short. The storm front was moving in faster than predicted, and the helicopter extraction window was closing rapidly. Morrison's team needed to reach the extraction point, but they were still pinned down by at least a dozen Taliban fighters in prepared positions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah made a decision that would have horrified her CIA supervisors. Instead of maintaining her covert overwatch role, she was going to actively communicate with the SEAL team. It violated every protocol in the book, but protocol wouldn't keep 6 American operators alive. She switched her radio to the frequency she had intercepted from the SEAL team's communications and keyed the microphone. "Viper 6, this is Guardian Angel. Do not respond verbally, but if you can hear me, wave your left hand." Morrison froze at the voice in his earpiece. Female, American accent, calm and professional despite the chaos around them. After a moment's hesitation, he raised his left hand and waved it slowly. "Copy your signal. Viper 6, I have overwatched your position from the North Ridge. Taliban strength is 18 fighters in prepared positions. I've eliminated 3 priority targets, but you're still outnumbered 3-1. Sarah paused to take another shot, this one at a Taliban fighter who was attempting to flank the SEAL team from the west. Her bullet caught him center mass, and he tumbled down the rocky slope. "Make that 17 fighters. Viper 6, you need to move to grid." Reference 41, SME 84592, 17,394. There's a natural defensive position there that will give you better fields of fire and cover from the incoming storm. Morrison quickly checked the coordinates on his GPS. Position was about 200 meters north of their current location, but it would require crossing open ground that was covered by at least 3 Taliban fighting positions. "Guardian Angel, that route is compromised. Will be exposed for at least 60 seconds. Negative Viper 6. I have positive identification on the threats. When I give the word, you move fast and you don't stop. I'll handle the overwatch." Sarah was already positioning herself for the most challenging shots of her career. She would need to engage multiple targets in rapid succession while the SEAL team moved across exposed terrain. It was the kind of precision shooting that existed more in Hollywood movies than real-world combat, but she had trained for exactly this scenario. "Viper 6, on my mark." 3, 2, 1, execute. Morrison and his team burst from cover simultaneously, sprinting across the rocky ground toward the defensive position Sarah had identified. They moved in a tactical formation that kept them spread out enough to minimize casualties from any single weapon, but close enough to provide mutual support. Sarah's rifle spoke 4 times in as many seconds. Each shot found its mark with surgical precision. Taliban fighters who had been preparing to engage the moving SEAL team instead dropped behind their cover, dead or dying. The sustained fire that should have cut Morrison's men to pieces never materialized. Contact front, Rodriguez shouted as 2 Taliban fighters emerged from a previously unidentified position directly ahead of the team. But before he could bring his weapon to bear, both fighters jerked backward as Sarah's bullets found them. The SEAL team reached the defensive position without losing a single man, though Thompson had a graze on his arm from a lucky shot that had gotten past Sarah's protective fire. Guardian Angel, this is Viper 6, Morrison transmitted once they had established security in their new position. I don't know who you are, but you just performed a miracle. What's your status? I'm mobile and have ammunition remaining. But we have a problem. The Taliban are calling for reinforcements. I'm monitoring their communications, and there's a quick reaction force moving toward this valley. The estimated time of arrival is 15 minutes. Sarah had positioned herself on a different ridge now, one that gave her better observation of the approaches to the valley. Through her night vision scope, she could see vehicle lights moving along the mountain road. At least 3 trucks, probably carrying 24 additional fighters. Viper 6, your extraction helicopter needs to arrive within the next 10 minutes, or you're going to be facing a reinforced company of Taliban fighters in prepared defensive positions. Morrison checked his watch. The extraction was still scheduled for another 12 minutes, and the storm front was making radio communication with the helicopter increasingly difficult. Static filled the airwaves, and their communications specialist was having trouble reaching anyone outside the immediate area. Guardian Angel, can you contact higher headquarters? We're having communication difficulties. Negative. My radio doesn't have that capability. But I have another option. Sarah was studying the approaching Taliban reinforcements through her scope. The lead vehicle was a Technicolor pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. The second truck appeared to be carrying infantry, while the third was too far away to identify clearly. Viper 6, I'm going to try to delay the reinforcements. If I can disable their vehicles, it might buy us enough time for extraction. It was an ambitious plan that would require shots at extreme range against moving targets. Sarah would need to hit the engine blocks of the approaching trucks with enough precision to disable them without causing explosions that might kill innocent civilians who could be in the area. She adjusted her scope for the extended range and began calculating wind drift, temperature effects, and the various ballistic factors that would influence her shots. The lead vehicle was now approximately 800 meters away and closing fast. Sarah steadied her breathing, allowed her heart rate to slow, and began applying pressure to the trigger. The shot would need to be perfect. There wouldn't be time for a second attempt if she missed. The bullet streaked across the darkness and punched through the truck's engine block with devastating effect. Steam and smoke immediately began pouring from under the hood, and the vehicle coasted to a stop as its engine seized. Taliban fighters poured out of the disabled truck and immediately began setting up defensive positions along the road. They were still a threat, but they were now on foot and would take much longer to reach the valley. Sarah was already engaging the second vehicle when Morrison's radio crackled to life. Viper 6, this is Angel 47. We are inbound for extraction. Ada 3 minutes. Be advised, weather is deteriorating rapidly. This will be our only opportunity. Morrison keyed his radio. Angel 47, we are combat ready for extraction. But be advised we have active enemy contact and unknown friendly sniper in overwatch. Copy. Viper 6, inbound to your smoke. Thompson immediately began preparing the signal smoke that would mark their exact position for the helicopter crew. But as he reached for the smoke canister, the night erupted with renewed gunfire. The Taliban fighters on the road had established a base of fire and were engaging both Sarah's position and the SEAL team's defensive position simultaneously. Bullets cracked overhead with increasing intensity as more fighters joined the engagement. "Guardian Angel, can you break contact and extract with us?" Morrison transmitted. Sarah's response was immediate. "Negative, Viper 6. My extraction method is different. Get your people on that helicopter." But even as she spoke, Sarah was facing the most intense return fire of the engagement. Taliban fighters had finally managed to identify her general position, and multiple weapons were concentrating fire on the ridge where she had last engaged from. Rock chips and bullet fragments filled the air around her, forcing her to seek better cover. The extraction helicopter's rotors were now audible in the distance, but the sound was also drawing additional enemy fire. Sarah realized that unless she could suppress the Taliban positions, the helicopter would be flying directly into a wall of small arms fire. She made her final tactical decision of the night, one that would either save 6 American lives or cost her own. Sarah abandoned her concealed position and began sprinting across the exposed ridgeline, her rifle slung across her back and her ghillie suit snagging on the rocky terrain. It was tactical suicide under normal circumstances, but these weren't normal circumstances. The incoming F-60 Black Hawk was flying directly into a crossfire that would turn it into a burning wreck before the SEAL team could even board. She needed to draw the Taliban fighters' attention away from the helicopter and toward herself. It was a one-way ticket, but 6 American lives were worth the trade. Taliban bullets whined past her head as she reached the ridge's highest point. From here, she had a commanding view of the entire valley, but she was also completely exposed to return fire from multiple positions. Sarah dropped prone behind a small boulder that provided minimal cover and began engaging targets with rapid, precise fire. Her first shot silenced a machine gun nest that had been tracking the helicopter's approach. The second dropped a Taliban fighter who was preparing to launch an RPG at the aircraft. But for every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. "What the hell is she doing?" Rodriguez muttered as he watched tracers streak toward Sarah's position. Through his scope, he could see muzzle flashes erupting from at least 8 different Taliban positions, all focused on the lone figure on the ridge. Morrison understood immediately. She's drawing fire away from the bird. That crazy woman is sacrificing herself so we can extract. The Black Hawk thundered into the valley, its pilots expertly navigating between the mountain peaks despite the deteriorating weather conditions. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Parker had been flying special operations missions for 12 years, and she had never seen a tactical situation quite like this one. "Angel 47, this is Viper 6, Morrison transmitted. "Be advised we have a friendly sniper providing overwatch from the North Ridge. She's taking heavy fire but keeping the enemy suppressed." Parker's co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer James Crawford, was already identifying the various threat positions through his night vision goggles. "I count multiple hostiles with small arms, but they're focused on that ridge position. We've got a window, but it's closing fast." The helicopter flared into a hover just long enough for Morrison's team to sprint from their defensive position and board the aircraft. Thompson and Chun went first, followed by Rodriguez, who continued to scan for targets even as he climbed into the cabin. Sarah's situation was becoming desperate. She had burned through most of her ammunition, and Taliban fighters were beginning to maneuver closer to her position. A grenade explosion just 10 meters away showered her with rock fragments, and she could feel warm blood trickling down her face from multiple cuts. But her sacrifice was working. The helicopter extraction was proceeding smoothly, with most of the enemy fire focused on her position rather than the aircraft. "Guardian Angel, this is Viper 6. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece as the last SEAL boarded the helicopter. "We are secure. What is your extraction plan?" Sarah fired her last 3 rounds at advancing Taliban fighters, then slung her empty rifle and drew her sidearm. "There is no extraction plan, Viper 6. Get your people out of here." "Negative. We are not leaving you behind." But even as Morrison spoke, the tactical situation was deteriorating beyond recovery. Taliban reinforcements were pouring into the valley from multiple directions, and the storm front was bringing with it winds that made helicopter operations extremely hazardous. Parker's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Viper 6, we need to depart immediately. Weather conditions are approaching minimums, and we have multiple hostiles converging on this position." Sarah understood the impossible position she had put the SEAL team in. They were trained never to leave a fellow American behind, but staying to rescue her would likely result in the loss of the entire team plus the helicopter crew. She made the decision for them. "Angel 4-7. This is Guardian Angel. You are clearly hot on my position. Danger, close, danger, close, danger, close." The word sent a chill through Morrison's spine. Sarah was calling for an airstrike on her own position, accepting certain death to eliminate the Taliban forces that threatened the helicopter's escape. "Guardian Angel, say again your last transmission," Parker requested, hoping she had misheard. "Angel 4-7. You are cleared to engage all targets within 50 meters of my position. I am expendable. Execute immediately." But Morrison was already keying his radio. "Belay that order. Angel 4-7, do not engage." "Guardian Angel, we are coming back for you." "Negative. Viper 6. The helicopter cannot survive another approach with this level of ground fire." "You have your orders." Sarah was down to her last magazine for her sidearm when inspiration struck. She had been thinking tactically when she needed to be thinking strategically. The Taliban fighters weren't just trying to kill her, they were trying to capture her alive. A female American intelligence operative would be an incredible propaganda prize, worth far more than her dead body. If she could convince them she was wounded and unable to fight, they might approach carelessly enough for her to exploit. Sarah fired her remaining rounds in rapid succession, not at specific targets but simply to make noise and simulate a desperate last stand. Then she allowed herself to collapse behind her boulder, groaning loudly enough for nearby Taliban fighters to hear. The ruse worked. Within minutes, she could hear voices approaching her position, speaking in excited Pashto about capturing the American woman alive. They were moving carelessly, confident that she was out of ammunition and wounded. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had spent 3 years training with Delta Force instructors in close-quarters combat. Her specialty wasn't just precision shooting, it was surviving situations that should have been unsurvivable. The first Taliban fighter to reach her position was carrying an AK-47 at the ready, but his attention was focused on the apparently wounded American woman behind the boulder. He never saw the knife that emerged from beneath Sarah's ghillie suit until it was buried between his ribs. Sarah relieved him of his weapon and ammunition, then used his body as cover while she assessed the tactical situation. At least 6 more Taliban fighters were approaching her position, but they were scattered across the rocky terrain and unable to provide mutual support. She began moving through the darkness like a phantom, using every piece of cover and concealment the mountain terrain provided. The Taliban fighters had night vision equipment, but Sarah had spent years perfecting techniques for defeating such technology. Her first target was a fighter positioned behind a cluster of rocks about 30 meters away. Sarah approached from his blind spot, using the dry creek bed to mask her movement. The Taliban fighter never knew she was there until her knife found his throat. The second target was more challenging. He was in an elevated position with good observation of the surrounding area, but Sarah had spotted a route that would bring her within striking distance. It required crawling across 50 meters of open ground while Taliban fighters searched for her with flashlights and night vision. Devices. The approach took nearly 10 minutes, but eventually Sarah was positioned directly below the fighter's perch. A single throwing knife, launched with deadly accuracy, ended his participation in the hunt. Meanwhile, the Black Hawk had reached the extraction point and was preparing to depart the area permanently. Morrison was arguing violently with the aircraft commander, demanding that they return for Sarah. But the weather conditions were making flight operations impossible. Viper 6, I understand your position, but we cannot risk the aircraft and crew on a recovery mission in these conditions, Parker explained. The wind shear alone would likely cause a crash. Morrison slammed his fist against the helicopter's cabin wall in frustration. Then we go back on foot. We are not abandoning her. Negative. That's not your call to make. But Rodriguez was already studying the tactical situation through the helicopter's thermal imaging system. Boss, take a look at this. Guardian Angel is still mobile and effective. I count at least 4 Taliban KIA in the past 15 minutes, and she's moving toward what looks like an escape route. Through the thermal display, they could see Sarah's heat signature moving systematically through the Taliban positions. She wasn't running, she was hunting. The realization changed Morrison's entire perspective on the situation. Sarah Martinez wasn't a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a professional operator conducting a tactical withdrawal while eliminating threats along the way. Guardian Angel, this is Viper 6. We have thermal observation of your position. What is your status and intent? Sarah's response was calm and controlled, despite the fact that she was currently hiding in a crevice while 2 Taliban fighters searched for her just meters away. Viper 6, I am mobile and effective. Proceeding to alternate extraction point Hotel 7. Recommend you depart the area and report the mission complete. Hotel 7 was a reference Sarah had found in intercepted Taliban communications, a cave system approximately 2 kilometers east of the valley that was used by local smugglers. If she could reach it, she would have shelter from the storm and multiple escape routes. But first, she had to deal with the immediate threat. The 2 Taliban fighters were getting closer, and their search pattern indicated they had some training in tracking techniques. Sarah waited until they were separated by about 20 meters, then engaged the closer fighter with her captured K-47. The brief firefight echoed across the mountains, but by the time reinforcements arrived, Sarah was gone. She had claimed the second fighter's weapon and equipment, giving her additional ammunition and a radio that would allow her to monitor Taliban communications. More importantly, she now had a clear route to the cave system. The journey took 2 hours through terrain that would have challenged a mountain goat. Sarah moved carefully, avoiding Taliban patrols that were still searching for her throughout the valley. The storm had arrived in full force, bringing with it snow, wind, and visibility that dropped to near zero. But the same weather conditions that made her movement treacherous also provided concealment from her pursuers. Taliban fighters were struggling with the conditions just as much as she was, and several patrol groups had already turned back to seek shelter. When Sarah finally reached the cave system, she was exhausted, wounded, and operating on pure determination. But she was alive, and she had successfully extracted 6 American operators from what should have been a fatal ambush. She found a defensible position deep in the cave system and began treating her wounds while monitoring Taliban radio traffic. The enemy was calling off their search until daylight, giving her several hours to rest and plan her next move. Outside, the storm raged across the Hindu Kush mountains, erasing tracks and concealing her escape route. Sarah Martinez had vanished into the Afghan wilderness like a ghost, leaving behind only whispered stories of the guardian angel who had appeared from nowhere to save 6 Navy SEALs. But her night wasn't over yet. She still had to survive until dawn, evade capture by a company of Taliban fighters, and somehow make contact with friendly forces for extraction. The most dangerous phase of her mission was just beginning. Dawn broke over the Afghan mountains with deceptive beauty, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and crimson. But for Sarah Martinez, huddled in the depths of a smuggler's cave, the sunrise marked the beginning of the most dangerous day of her life. The Taliban radio she had captured crackled with increasingly urgent communications. Through her headphones, she listened as search teams reported their positions and coordinated a systematic sweep of the entire valley system. What had started as an opportunistic pursuit the night before was now evolving into a full-scale manhunt. Sector 7 is clear. Moving to Sector 8 came one transmission in heavily accented English, indicating the presence of foreign fighters among the Taliban ranks. Sarah checked her remaining equipment with the methodical precision of someone whose life depended on inventory management. 2 AK-47 magazines with approximately 40 rounds total. A fragmentation grenade taken from one of last night's victims. Her sidearm with one remaining magazine. A combat knife. The captured radio. And most critically, a GPS unit that still had enough battery power to guide her to potential extraction points. But extraction was a theoretical concept at this point. She was operating in the middle of Taliban-controlled territory, at least 60 kilometers from the nearest coalition outpost, with no official support and no backup plan. Her CIA handlers believed she was conducting routine intelligence gathering in Kabul. The SEAL team thought she was safely extracted through her own mysterious channels. Sarah Martinez was completely on her own. She had survived worse situations, but never while being actively hunted by an enemy that had both numerical superiority and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. Cave system offered temporary concealment, but it was also a potential trap. Ancient smuggling routes provided multiple entry and exit points. But Sarah had no way of knowing if Taliban fighters were already familiar with the tunnel network. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every echo could mask approaching footsteps. Sarah decided to move before the Taliban search expanded to include the caves. She gathered her equipment and began working her way deeper into the tunnel system, using her night vision goggles to navigate passages that hadn't seen natural light in decades. The tunnels told stories of Afghanistan's complicated history. Soviet-era ammunition caches, long since emptied. Opium storage areas from the drug trade that funded endless conflict. Sleeping areas where Mujahideen fighters had once planned operations against occupying forces. Now these same tunnels might serve as her salvation or her tomb. After 20 minutes of careful movement through increasingly narrow passages, Sarah emerged from a concealed exit, nearly a kilometer from her entry point. The cave opening was hidden behind a waterfall that had frozen solid during the night, creating a natural curtain that provided both concealment and a fresh water source. She paused to assess her tactical situation. The valley below showed signs of intense Taliban activity. At least 3 search teams were moving in coordinated patterns, each consisting of 6 to 8 fighters equipped with modern weapons and communication equipment. Vehicle-mounted patrols covered the main routes, while foot teams investigated every potential hiding spot. But Sarah noticed something that gave her hope. The Taliban search pattern was methodical but predictable, following standard military doctrine that she had studied extensively during her special operations training. They were clearing terrain systematically, which meant she could anticipate their movements and stay ahead of the search. More importantly, their radio discipline was sloppy. Taliban commanders were broadcasting their intentions in clear language, giving Sarah advance warning of patrol routes and search areas. She began planning her escape route, studying the terrain through her binoculars while monitoring enemy communications. The optimal path would take her northeast toward a mountain pass that led to a different valley system. Intelligence reports indicated the area was contested, but not completely under Taliban control. The journey would require crossing approximately 15 kilometers of hostile territory while avoiding multiple patrol routes. Under normal circumstances, it would be a challenging but manageable mission for someone with her training. But these weren't normal circumstances. Sarah's first obstacle appeared within an hour of leaving the cave system. A Taliban patrol had established a checkpoint at a narrow mountain pass that represented the most direct route to her objective. Through her binoculars, she could see 4 fighters with a vehicle-mounted machine gun, positioned to intercept anyone attempting to cross the pass. Bypassing the checkpoint would require a detour that added at least 6 hours to her journey, but a direct assault was suicide. Sarah chose a third option that combined patience with tactical audacity. She positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the checkpoint and began a detailed surveillance of the Taliban patrol's routine. Over the course of 2 hours, she identified their guard rotation schedule, their communication patterns, and most importantly, a 15-minute window when only 2 fighters remained alert while the others rested. Sarah had no intention of attacking the checkpoint. Instead, she waited for a supply convoy that Taliban radio traffic indicated would be passing through the area. When the convoy arrived, 3 trucks loaded with ammunition and supplies, she made her move. Sarah's plan required split-second timing and nerves of steel. As the convoy approached the checkpoint, she used her captured Taliban radio to transmit a false message that identified an American Special Forces team approaching from the south. The checkpoint guards immediately redirected their attention away from the convoy and toward the fictional threat. During the resulting confusion, Sarah sprinted across the pass behind the moving convoy, using the trucks as visual cover while the Taliban fighters searched for enemies that didn't exist. By the time they realized they had been deceived, Sarah was already deep in the forest on the opposite side of the pass. The technique was a classic intelligence operation misdirection combined with exploitation of enemy communication systems. But it also meant that every Taliban fighter in the region now knew an American operative was in the area and actively evading capture. Sarah's radio confirmed her worst fears. Taliban commanders were calling in additional resources, including a helicopter that would dramatically improve their ability to track her movements across the mountainous terrain. She needed to change her entire approach to survival. Moving during daylight was becoming impossible, but waiting for darkness meant giving the Taliban another 12 hours to position additional forces between her and potential extraction points. Sarah made a decision that would have seemed insane to most special operations professionals. Instead of continuing to evade the Taliban search, she was going to infiltrate it. She spent the next 3 hours carefully tracking the Taliban patrol. That consisted of 5 fighters moving through her general area. Using techniques learned during advanced surveillance training, Sarah identified the patrol leader, studied their movement patterns, and most critically, determined that they were operating independently without direct radio contact with higher command. The patrol was following a predictable route through a valley that offered multiple ambush opportunities. Sarah selected a position where the terrain would funnel the Taliban fighters into a killing zone with limited escape routes. But her objective wasn't to eliminate the entire patrol. It was to capture their equipment and assume their identity. Sarah's first shot dropped the patrol leader instantly, creating immediate confusion among the remaining fighters. Her second shot eliminated the radio operator before he could transmit a distress call. The surviving Taliban fighters took cover and began returning fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes from positions Sarah had already abandoned. Using movement techniques perfected during urban warfare training, Sarah maneuvered to within hand grenade range of the Taliban position. The fragmentation grenade landed precisely where it needed to, eliminating 2 more fighters and wounding the survivor. The final Taliban fighter was wounded, but still dangerous when Sarah approached his position. She could have killed him easily, but instead chose to render first aid while interrogating him about Taliban troop dispositions and search plans. The intelligence she gathered was invaluable. Taliban forces were concentrating their search in the northern valleys, expecting her to attempt to escape toward coalition positions. They had established blocking positions at 3 key mountain passes and were planning to use their helicopter to conduct aerial reconnaissance at first light the following day. But most importantly, Sarah learned that she wasn't the Taliban's only priority. Intelligence sources had reported American special operations activity throughout the region, forcing Taliban commanders to divide their attention between hunting her and defending against potential coalition raids. After securing the wounded fighter in a position where he would eventually be found by friendly forces, Sarah claimed the patrol's equipment and began implementing her infiltration plan. The Taliban uniforms were a reasonable fit, and their weapons and equipment would allow her to move through enemy territory with significantly less risk of detection. More importantly, she now had access to Taliban communication networks and authentication codes that would allow her to monitor and influence enemy operations. Sarah's transformation from hunted fugitive to covert infiltrator represented a dramatic shift in tactical approach. Instead of running from Taliban forces, she would now be walking among them, gathering intelligence while positioning herself for eventual extraction. But the psychological demands of the deception would be enormous. One mistake, one suspicious glance, one incorrectly pronounced Pashto phrase could result in capture, torture, and eventual execution. Sarah would need to become someone else entirely, suppressing every instinct that marked her as an American Special Operations professional. As she adjusted the captured Taliban equipment and prepared to enter enemy-controlled territory, Sarah reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had been a covert intelligence operative conducting routine surveillance. Now she was attempting one of the most audacious infiltration missions in modern warfare history. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to save 6 Navy SEALs, she had created a situation that might require an entire Special Operations task force to resolve. But Sarah Martinez had never been one to calculate odds when American lives were at stake. She checked her equipment one final time, practiced her cover story in broken Pashto, and began walking toward the Taliban positions that had been hunting her since dawn. The greatest test of her career was about to begin, and failure would mean more than just her own death. It would compromise every operation she had ever been involved in and potentially expose intelligence networks that had taken years to establish. But as Sarah approached the first Taliban checkpoint in her captured uniform, she felt the familiar calm that had sustained her through 15 years of covert operations. She was no longer Sarah Martinez, CIA operative. She was now Fatima, a local villager whose husband had been killed in coalition airstrikes and who had joined the Taliban seeking revenge. The performance of her lifetime was about to begin. The Taliban checkpoint materialized from the morning mist like something from a nightmare. Sandbagged positions flanked a narrow mountain road, with interlocking fields of fire that could stop a convoy in its tracks. Armed fighters moved between defensive positions with the casual confidence of men who absolutely owned this territory. Sarah approached on foot, maintaining the shuffling gait and downcast eyes she had observed in countless Afghan villagers. The captured Taliban radio chattered constantly in her earpiece, providing real-time intelligence about patrol movements and search operations. But now she was walking directly toward the very people who had been hunting her since dawn. "Stop!" The command came in Pashto from a bearded fighter who couldn't have been more than 19 years old. His AK-47 was trained on Sarah's center mass, finger resting on the trigger guard. "State your business." Sarah had rehearsed this moment during her approach, drawing on years of deep cover training and her intimate knowledge of Afghan culture. She responded in heavily accented Pashto, mixing local dialect with the emotional tremor of a grieving widow. "I am Fatima, daughter of Hamid from the village of Kortani. Coalition forces killed my husband yesterday. I seek to join the faithful in their struggle against the infidels." The young fighter's expression softened slightly. Revenge against coalition forces was a motivation he understood intimately. But his training hadn't been completely abandoned. He gestured for Sarah to remove her outer garments so he could check for weapons or suicide vest. Sarah complied, revealing the traditional women's clothing she had taken from an abandoned house, along with the carefully concealed Taliban weapons that supported her cover story. To the checkpoint guards, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed: another war widow seeking vengeance against the foreigners who had destroyed her life. "Where did you get these weapons?" the guard asked, examining the AK-47 she carried. "From the patrol that found my husband's body. They said I would need them to fight the Americans." It was a plausible explanation that aligned with Taliban recruitment practices. The guard nodded and waved her through the checkpoint, but not before providing directions to a Taliban training camp located 15 kilometers deeper in the mountains. Sarah accepted the directions with appropriate gratitude, but privately she was calculating the intelligence value of what she had just learned. A previously unknown Taliban training facility, complete with grid coordinates and information about current security procedures. The intelligence community would consider this information alone worth the risk she was taking. But Sarah's mission wasn't intelligence gathering, it was survival and eventual extraction. She needed to maintain her cover long enough to reach friendly territory or establish communication with coalition forces. The journey to the training camp took her through some of the most spectacular and dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. Mountain trails that had been carved by smugglers and warriors over centuries of conflict, paths that were invisible from aerial reconnaissance, but well known to local fighters. Along the way, Sarah encountered other Taliban personnel moving through the area. Each contact was a potential death sentence if her cover story failed, but it also provided opportunities to gather intelligence about enemy operations and dispositions. She learned that the Taliban were planning a major offensive against coalition positions in the next valley, timed to coincide with the withdrawal of American forces from several forward operating bases. The intelligence was actionable and time-sensitive, exactly the kind of information that could save hundreds of American lives if it reached the right people. But Sarah had no way to communicate with friendly forces without compromising her position. Her CIA-issued radio was concealed, but couldn't transmit without revealing her location to Taliban direction-finding equipment. She would have to carry the intelligence with her until an opportunity presented itself. The training camp exceeded Sarah's worst expectations. Hidden in a valley that was invisible from most aerial observation platforms, it contained facilities for at least 200 fighters, weapons storage areas, communications equipment, medical facilities, even a makeshift airstrip that could handle small aircraft. But most disturbing were the foreign instructors Sarah observed through her peripheral vision. Men speaking Arabic with accents that suggested origins in Iraq and Syria, veterans of conflicts that had honed their skills in urban warfare and terrorist tactics. Sarah was assigned to a group of new recruits, mostly local villagers whose lives had been disrupted by the ongoing conflict. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar: family members killed in coalition airstrikes, homes destroyed by fighting, economic opportunities eliminated by decades of war. Under different circumstances, Sarah might have felt sympathy for these people caught between competing forces in a conflict they didn't choose. But survival required her to suppress such emotions and focus on maintaining her cover. Identity. The training regimen was designed to transform grieving civilians into effective fighters in the shortest possible time. Weapons instruction, basic tactics, bomb-making techniques, and most critically, indoctrination sessions that reinforced hatred for coalition forces. Sarah participated in every activity, demonstrating enthusiasm for anti-American rhetoric while carefully memorizing details about Taliban capabilities and intentions. The psychological stress was enormous. She was surrounded by people who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. But her special operations background served her well. Years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of deep cover operation, and she found herself adapting to the role with disturbing ease. The most dangerous moment came during her third day at the camp. when a Taliban intelligence officer began questioning new recruits about their backgrounds. Sarah had prepared for this possibility, but the interrogation was more thorough than expected. "Tell me about your husband's death," the intelligence officer demanded. Studying Sarah's face for signs of deception, Sarah launched into a detailed account of a fictional airstrike that had supposedly killed her family, incorporating real events she had witnessed during her time in Afghanistan. The emotional trauma was easy to simulate. She had seen too many genuine victims of the war to struggle with authenticity, but the intelligence officer was persistent. He asked for specific details about her village, her family, her husband's occupation. Sarah provided answers that were consistent with her cover story, but each question increased the risk that she would make a fatal mistake. The breakthrough came when another recruit corroborated parts of Sarah's story. The woman, genuinely traumatized by coalition operations, had lived in a nearby village and remembered hearing about the attack Sarah described. Her testimony convinced the intelligence officer that Sarah's background was legitimate, but the close call reminded Sarah that her infiltration could be exposed at any moment. She needed to find an escape route before her luck ran out. The opportunity came during a training exercise that took recruits outside the main camp perimeter. Sarah volunteered for a patrol that would allow her to scout potential extraction routes while maintaining her cover as an enthusiastic recruit. The patrol leader was a veteran Taliban fighter named Ahmed who had been fighting coalition forces for over a decade. His knowledge of local terrain was encyclopedic, and he used the training patrol to teach new recruits about ambush techniques and improvised explosive device placement. Sarah absorbed every detail while searching for opportunities to separate from the group. The patrol route would take them within 3 kilometers of a ridgeline that offered potential helicopter landing zones, but reaching it would require abandoning her cover and risking immediate pursuit. The decision was made for her when the patrol encountered an unexpected obstacle: a coalition reconnaissance drone conducting surveillance of the area. Ahmed immediately ordered the patrol to take cover and establish defensive positions, preparing for a possible airstrike. Sarah realized this was her chance. While the other recruits focused on the overhead threat, she could slip away into the rocky terrain that surrounded their position. The drone's presence suggested that coalition forces were operating in the area, potentially close enough for her to reach if she moved quickly, but abandoning her infiltration would mean sacrificing weeks of intelligence gathering and potentially alerting the Taliban to coalition surveillance activities. Sarah faced an impossible choice between personal survival and mission accomplishment. The decision became easier when she intercepted Taliban radio communications, indicating that her true identity had been discovered. A captured Taliban fighter, possibly the wounded survivor from her patrol ambush days, earlier had provided information about the American woman who had been masquerading as a local recruit. Taliban security forces were already moving toward the training camp, armed with detailed descriptions and photographs that would make Sarah's continued deception impossible. She had minutes, not hours, before her cover was completely blown. Sarah began moving away from the patrol's position, using techniques learned during escape and evasion training to minimize her visibility to both human observers and electronic surveillance. The drone overhead was actually an asset. Its presence kept the Taliban patrol focused on concealment rather than maintaining accountability of individual members, but her escape was complicated by terrain that offered limited concealment and Taliban reinforcements that were moving to surround the entire area. Sarah found herself caught between converging enemy forces with no clear route to friendly territory. The radio traffic in her earpiece became increasingly urgent as Taliban commanders coordinated their response to the intelligence about her presence. Search teams were being repositioned, blocking positions were being established, and helicopter assets were being deployed to prevent her escape. Sarah had successfully penetrated one of the most secure Taliban strongholds in Afghanistan, gathered intelligence that could save American lives, and maintained her cover for 3 critical days. But now she was trapped in hostile territory with her identity compromised and enemy forces closing in from all directions. The final phase of her Afghanistan odyssey was about to begin, and it would test every skill she had acquired during 15 years of special operations. Sarah Martinez was running out of time, options, and luck. But she still had one advantage that the Taliban had consistently underestimated: the determination of someone who had pledged to leave no American behind, even if that American was herself. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she heard her real name crackle through the Taliban radio frequency. The American woman calls herself Sarah Martinez. She is CIA, highly trained, extremely dangerous. Commander Yassin wants her taken alive for questioning. The patrol leader, Ahmed, was already reaching for his radio when Sarah made her move. Years of close-quarters combat training compressed into a single fluid motion. Her knife found his throat before he could transmit a single word. But the other 5 patrol members were already turning toward the sound of their leader's death rattled. Sarah dove behind a boulder cluster as automatic weapons fire erupted around her position. Rock chips and bullet fragments filled the air, creating a deadly storm of stone and metal. She had perhaps 30 seconds before Taliban reinforcements would converge on the gunfire, trapping her in a killing zone with no escape routes. The captured Taliban radio provided a constant stream of enemy positions and intentions. Contact at Grid 41, SME 89472, 18394. American operatives confirmed. All units converge immediately. Sarah counted at least 6 different Taliban call signs responding to the alert. Conservative estimates put enemy strength at over 40 fighters, all moving toward her position with detailed knowledge of the local terrain. The numbers were impossible, but Sarah had survived impossible odds before. Her first priority was breaking contact with the immediate patrol. Using a fragmentation grenade as a distraction, Sarah sprinted toward higher ground while the explosion temporarily suppressed enemy fire. The maneuver bought her perhaps 2 minutes of freedom before Taliban fighters would reorganize and resume pursuit. But those 2 minutes were critical. Sarah reached a ridgeline that offered observation of the entire valley system, allowing her to assess the tactical situation with devastating clarity. Taliban forces were moving in a coordinated pattern that demonstrated sophisticated command and control. This wasn't a hasty pursuit, it was a carefully orchestrated manhunt designed to eliminate all possible escape routes. Vehicle-mounted patrols blocked the main valley exits. Foot patrols covered secondary trails and mountain passes. Most critically, Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the South. Taliban aviation assets that would make concealment nearly impossible. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline like a mechanical vulture, its crew scanning the terrain below with thermal imaging equipment that could detect human body heat through most forms of natural cover. Sarah pressed herself against the cold rock face, using techniques learned during counter-surveillance training to minimize her thermal signature. But concealment was a temporary solution at best. Taliban ground forces were methodically clearing every potential hiding position, and the helicopter's thermal sensors would eventually detect her regardless of camouflage techniques. Sarah needed to change the tactical dynamics of the engagement. Instead of continuing to evade Taliban forces, she decided to attack them. Her first target was a Taliban patrol moving carelessly through a dry creek bed approximately 200 meters below her position. The patrol consisted of 4 fighters who believed they were safely behind friendly lines, chatting casually while conducting their assigned search pattern. Sarah's shot dropped the patrol leader instantly, creating immediate confusion among the surviving fighters. Her second shot eliminated the radio operator before he could report contact. The remaining 2 Taliban fighters took cover, but were now isolated from command and control. The psychological impact of Sarah's offensive action rippled through Taliban communications. Patrol leaders who had been advancing aggressively suddenly became cautious, recognizing that the American operative was still armed, mobile, and extremely dangerous. But Sarah's attack also revealed her position to the helicopter crew. The aircraft immediately began maneuvering toward her location, its crew preparing to engage with door-mounted machine guns. Sarah abandoned her firing position and began moving along the ridgeline, using rocky terrain to break up her movement signature while seeking cover from aerial observation. The helicopter's thermal sensors tracked her general direction but couldn't maintain positive identification as she moved between rock formations. Taliban radio traffic indicated increasing frustration among enemy commanders. What should have been a simple capture operation was evolving into a running battle that was consuming significant resources while producing minimal results. "She is moving north toward the coast road," reported one patrol leader. "Recommend positioning blocking forces at checkpoint 7. Sarah smiled grimly as she monitored the transmission. Taliban forces were reacting to her movements rather than anticipating them, giving her tactical initiative despite being vastly outnumbered. But her situation remained desperate. Taliban reinforcements were arriving from multiple directions, and the helicopter was becoming increasingly aggressive in its attempts to locate her exact position. Sarah's breakthrough came when she intercepted a Taliban transmission that revealed critical intelligence. "American Special Forces reported moving toward our position from the east. All units maintain alert for coalition rescue attempt." The transmission confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Coalition forces were actively searching for her, probably initiated by the SEAL team she had saved days earlier. Morrison and his men hadn't abandoned her after all. But coalition rescue forces would face the same challenges that were threatening Sarah's survival. Taliban fighters controlled all approaches to her position, and any rescue attempt would require fighting through prepared defensive positions with significant casualties. Sarah realized she needed to create an opportunity for friendly forces to reach her position. The Taliban's numerical advantage could be neutralized if she could coordinate her actions with an incoming rescue team. She began studying Taliban defensive positions through her binoculars, identifying weaknesses that could be exploited during a coordinated attack. The enemy had established strong positions covering likely approach routes, but their deployment assumed Sarah would continue attempting to evade rather than coordinate with rescue forces. The key vulnerability was Taliban communications. Enemy commanders were using radio frequencies that Sarah could monitor and potentially influence. If she could create false intelligence reports, she might be able to misdirect Taliban forces away from coalition approach routes. Using her captured radio, Sarah began transmitting false position reports in accented Pashto that mimicked the communication style she had observed. "American woman spotted moving south toward village. Require immediate reinforcement." The deception worked better than expected. Taliban units began repositioning based on Sarah's false reports, creating gaps in their defensive perimeter that coalition forces could potentially exploit. But Sarah's radio transmissions also provided Taliban direction-finding equipment with increasingly accurate fixes on her location. She could hear enemy forces adjusting their search pattern based on triangulation data from her communications. The tactical situation was becoming unsustainable. Sarah was simultaneously coordinating with potential rescue forces while being hunted by an enemy that was closing in on her position with mathematical precision. Her salvation came from an unexpected source: weather conditions that grounded the Taliban helicopter and limited visibility throughout the valley. A sudden snow squall moved through the area, creating whiteout conditions that neutralized Taliban technological advantages while providing concealment from movement. Sarah seized the opportunity to relocate to a completely different area, abandoning her previous position just minutes before Taliban ground forces reached it. The storm allowed her to move across terrain that would have been impossible to traverse under clear conditions. The weather was a double-edged sword. Coalition rescue forces would face the same visibility limitations that were protecting Sarah from Taliban observation. Any rescue attempt would require extraordinary coordination and risk-taking in conditions that made helicopter operations extremely hazardous. Sarah found temporary shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut that offered protection from the elements while providing observation of likely coalition approach routes. From this position, she could monitor Taliban communications while watching for signs of friendly forces. The radio traffic revealed increasing desperation among Taliban commanders. Their carefully planned operation was falling apart due to weather conditions and Sarah's tactical innovations. Several patrol leaders were reporting equipment failures and navigation problems that were degrading their ability to maintain coordinated pursuit. But Sarah knew the respite was temporary. Weather conditions would eventually improve, allowing Taliban forces to resume their hunt with renewed intensity. She needed to establish contact with coalition rescue forces before the tactical situation deteriorated further. The opportunity came when she intercepted a transmission on a frequency that wasn't being used by Taliban forces. The voice was unmistakably American, speaking with the professional brevity that marked special operations communications. Guardian Angel. Guardian Angel, this is Rescue 6. If you can hear this transmission, respond on frequency 147.825. Sarah's hands shook as she adjusted her radio to the specified frequency. After days of isolation and constant danger, she was finally hearing friendly voices. Rescue 6, this is Guardian Angel. I am alive and operational. What is your location and status? The response was immediate and professional. Guardian Angel, we have been searching for you for 72 hours. We are currently 8 kilometers east of your last known position. Can you move to grid reference 41 SME 80, 5623 17789 for extraction? Sarah checked the coordinates on her GPS unit. The extraction point was feasible, but would require crossing territory that was crawling with Taliban search teams. More critically, she would need to time her movement to avoid both enemy patrols and the improving weather conditions that would soon allow Taliban helicopter operations to resume. Rescue 6. I can reach the extraction point, but will need diversionary activities to clear Taliban forces from the approach routes. Enemy strength is approximately 50 fighters with vehicle and aviation support. Copy. Guardian Angel. We are coordinating with higher headquarters for supporting fires. Move to extraction point in 30 minutes. We will provide cover. Sarah began her final movement through enemy territory, carrying intelligence that could reshape coalition understanding of Taliban capabilities while racing against time to reach salvation. The most dangerous phase of her Afghanistan odyssey was about to begin, but for the first time in days, she wasn't facing it alone. The extraction point was a nightmare of exposed terrain surrounded by Taliban positions on 3 sides. Sarah reached the designated coordinates with 15 minutes to spare, but coalition rescue forces were nowhere in sight. Through her binoculars, she counted at least 20 enemy fighters positioned within effective weapons range of the landing zone. Her radio crackled with urgent transmissions from the incoming rescue team. Guardian Angel, this is Rescue 6. We are inbound but taking heavy ground fire. Taliban forces have engaged our approach route with prepared positions. Sarah could hear the battle raging in the distance, automatic weapons fire punctuated by explosions that echoed across the mountain valleys. The rescue team was fighting their way through Taliban defensive positions, but their progress was measured in meters rather than kilometers. Rescue 6, I have observation of the extraction point. Enemy strength is heavier than expected. Recommend alternate landing zone, approximately 500 meters north of current position. But even as Sarah transmitted the recommendation, She realized the tactical impossibility of the situation. Taliban forces had turned the entire area into an interlocking network of defensive positions. Any helicopter landing would be met with concentrated fire from multiple directions. The solution required Sarah to do what she had been doing for the past week, accomplish the impossible. Through precise application of violence, she began systematically engaging Taliban positions that posed the greatest threat to helicopter operations. Her first shot eliminated a machine gun team that controlled the primary approach route. The second dropped an RPG operator, who could have destroyed the rescue aircraft with a single well-placed round. But Sarah's offensive actions also revealed her exact position to every Taliban fighter in the area. Return fire began impacting around her location with increasing accuracy, forcing her to move constantly while maintaining pressure on enemy defensive positions. "Guardian Angel, we have you in sight," came the voice of the rescue team leader. "Maintain your current position. We are moving to support." Through the tactical chaos, Sarah could see American forces advancing through the valley, a combined team of Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Air Force Special Operations personnel, all coordinating their assault with the precision that marked elite units. Leading the rescue team was Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the same SEAL officer Sarah had saved during the initial ambush. Morrison had spent 4 days convincing higher command to authorize a rescue operation for the mysterious Guardian Angel, who had saved his team. "All stations, this is Rescue 6, Morrison transmitted. "Guardian Angel has enemy forces fixed in position. Execute supporting fires on designated targets." Artillery rounds began impacting Taliban positions with devastating accuracy, guided by Sarah's real-time intelligence about enemy locations. Each explosion eliminated defensive positions that had been preventing helicopter access to the extraction point. But Taliban forces were adapting to coalition tactics with disturbing effectiveness. Sarah watched enemy fighters repositioning to avoid artillery strikes while maintaining coverage of potential landing zones. Her radio intercepted Taliban communications, coordinating a final assault on her position. At least 15 fighters were maneuvering to overrun her defensive position before coalition rescue forces could reach her. Sarah made her final tactical decision in Afghanistan. Instead of waiting for rescue, she would assault the Taliban positions herself, creating the opportunity for helicopter extraction through offensive action rather than defensive survival. She abandoned her concealed position and began moving through Taliban lines like a phantom, using every technique learned during 15 years of special operations. Close-range engagements with knife and sidearm. Improvised explosive devices created from captured Taliban equipment. Psychological warfare that convinced enemy fighters they were facing a much larger force. The Taliban assault collapsed into confusion as fighters found themselves under attack from directions they had believed were secure. Sarah's individual offensive action created gaps in enemy lines that coalition rescue forces exploited with devastating effectiveness. Morrison's rescue team linked up with Sarah's position just as Taliban reinforcements began arriving from outlying areas. The combined American force established a defensive perimeter while calling for immediate helicopter extraction. "This is Angel 47. Inbound for extraction," came the familiar voice of Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Parker, the same pilot who had extracted Morrison's team from the original ambush. "Landing zone is hot. Be ready to move." The Black Hawk helicopter descended through a storm of small arms fire, its crew returning fire with door-mounted machine guns while maintaining a stable platform for passenger loading. Taliban bullets cracked through the rotor wash, but Parker held the aircraft steady through years of combat experience. Sarah was the last person to board the helicopter, providing covering fire while rescue team members climbed aboard. As she pulled herself into the aircraft's cabin, she came face to face with Morrison, the SEAL officer whose life she had saved a week earlier. "Thank you," Morrison shouted over the engine noise. "For everything." Sarah nodded but didn't respond verbally. The physical and psychological toll of her Afghanistan experience had pushed her beyond normal human endurance limits. She was alive, but forever changed by 7 days that had tested every aspect of her training and character. The helicopter climbed rapidly away from the extraction point, leaving behind Taliban forces that were still coordinating pursuit operations. Through the aircraft's windows, Sarah could see the Hindu Kush mountains stretching endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful, deadly, and unforgiving dot as the rescue helicopter crossed into friendly airspace. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax for the first time in a week. The intelligence she carried would reshape American understanding of Taliban capabilities and save countless coalition lives. The SEAL team she had protected would continue their mission of hunting high-value targets throughout Afghanistan, but most importantly, Sarah Martinez had proven that individual courage and professional competence could overcome seemingly impossible odds. In a war defined by technological superiority and overwhelming firepower, she had succeeded through the most basic military virtues: courage, skill, and determination to leave no American behind. 3 hours later, Sarah was debriefing intelligence officers at Bagram Airfield, providing detailed information about Taliban training facilities, communication networks, and operational planning. Her 7-day odyssey through enemy territory had produced more actionable intelligence than most operations collected in months. Official records of Sarah's Afghanistan mission remain classified, hidden in archives that most people will never access. But among the special operations community, stories circulate about the guardian angel who appeared from nowhere to save 6 Navy SEALs, then disappeared into the Afghan wilderness for a week before fighting her way to freedom. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison never learned Sarah's real name or CIA affiliation. To him, she remained simply Guardian Angel, a mysterious figure who embodied everything the American military claimed to represent. Sarah returned to her covert operations career, conducting missions in locations and circumstances that officially don't exist. But Afghanistan had changed her in ways that would influence every subsequent assignment. She had learned that individual actions could have strategic consequences, that training and experience could overcome impossible odds, and that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act. Despite it, the Taliban never identified the American woman who had infiltrated their training camp and escaped their most intensive manhunt. She remained a ghost story told around campfires, a reminder that American Special Operations Forces could appear anywhere, anytime, with capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding. Years later, when Sarah Martinez retired from government service, she carried with her the knowledge that she had upheld the most sacred promise in American military culture. In the mountains of Afghanistan, surrounded by enemies who wanted her dead, she had proven that no American would be left behind, not even herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.